She said, "Walk me home." But halfway there, I realized, she didn't want to go home, she just didn't want the night, or me, to end. It started the way every quiet evening usually did, the soft hum of the cafe, the muted clatter of cups being washed, and the golden light spilling across the wooden tables like melted honey. He was always one of the last to leave, nursing the end of his coffee long after the crowd had thinned. She was too, always there, a few tables away, with a notebook open and a pen resting loosely between her fingers, as if the world moved slower for her. He never meant to notice her, not at first. But over time, her presence became part of the room's rhythm, the way she crossed her legs, the way she lifted her cup, the faint, almost imperceptible smile she wore when lost in thought. She looked like someone who had spent years holding her composure together, even when it weighed heavy on her shoulders. Tonight, though, something was different. Her usual calm seemed to ripple beneath the surface. She turned a page in her notebook, stared at it for a moment, then closed it with a quiet sigh. When she looked up, her gaze met his, not briefly, not by accident, but with a kind of decision behind it. For a heartbeat, neither of them looked away. Then she stood, adjusting her shawl, and walked toward him. Her perfume, faintly floral, clean, reached him a second before her voice did. "Walk me home." It wasn't really a question. More like a statement she'd been rehearsing silently before letting it fall into the open. He blinked, surprised, they'd barely exchanged words beyond polite greetings. Yet something in her tone left no space for hesitation. He nodded before his mind caught up. Outside, the evening air was cool and still, the city resting under a silver haze of streetlights. They walked side by side, their steps unhurried. At first, the silence was awkward, two strangers trying to find the right rhythm. But then, slowly, it became easy. Comfortable. Natural. She didn't say much, but when she did, it was soft and thoughtful, little observations about the quiet of the streets, the way the lights shimmered on the wet pavement, the sound of their footsteps blending into the night. At one point, their sleeves brushed. It was the smallest touch, almost accidental, but it lingered, like a pulse running quietly between them. He didn't move away, and she didn't either. When they passed the bakery on the corner, he noticed the faint smile tug at her lips. "It always smells better at night," she murmured. He laughed quietly, surprised at how natural it felt. The walk continued like that, small talk stitched with silence, glances that lingered a little too long. There was something fragile in the air, like both were afraid that words might break the moment. As they turned down her street, she slowed her pace. The night seemed to hold its breath around them. And for the first time, he realized that what she wanted wasn't company, it was connection. The kind that didn't demand, didn't rush, just existed quietly between two people who didn't expect to find it. When they stopped under the faint glow of a street lamp, she looked at him, really looked. There was a question in her eyes, though she never asked it aloud. That night, nothing dramatic happened. No confessions, no grand gestures. Just a quiet walk that felt heavier, somehow, than all the words they'd never said. And as he watched her disappear into the dim hallway of her building, he knew something unspoken had begun, something neither of them fully understood yet, but both had already felt. Halfway through her quiet street, she slowed her pace, her hands brushing lightly over the strap of her bag. He noticed the shift immediately, the way her steps became unhurried, almost tentative, as though she were measuring the space between them and the world. "Let's take the long way," she said casually, though there was nothing casual about her tone. Her eyes flicked toward the park at the end of the block, where the faint orange glow of the street lamps cast long shadows across the wet pavement. He hesitated for only a moment before following, sensing that tonight wasn't about the destination, but about the journey. The park greeted them in silence. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and fallen leaves, a hint of autumn lingering in every breath. The streets outside had fallen quiet, and here, in the hush of the trees, their footsteps seemed louder than they were, echoing like soft percussion in the night. She walked close, close enough that their arms brushed occasionally, small sparks of contact that neither pulled away from nor acknowledged directly. She began to talk, softly, almost as if testing her voice in the empty space. "I like walking here at night," she said, "because the city quiets down, and you can hear yourself think." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that pulled at him. He listened, allowing the space for her to fill the gaps with her thoughts, noticing how the light from the street lamps danced across her hair, catching in the strands like liquid gold. He offered nothing more than occasional questions, open-ended and gentle, inviting her to unravel herself. "Do you come here often?" he asked. "Sometimes," she replied. "But mostly, I come when I don't know where else to go. When the walls of my apartment feel too close." She glanced at him then, and for a fleeting second, vulnerability flickered across her face, quickly hidden behind a composed, almost teasing smile. The path curved along a small pond, where the water reflected the moon and the silhouettes of the trees. She paused, letting the sound of the gentle ripples fill the space between them. The wind played with her hair, lifting strands across her cheek. Without thinking, he reached out and tucked a loose strand behind her ear, the motion delicate, reverent. Her eyes met his, and her breath caught, but she didn't step away. The moment stretched, fragile and alive, a silent acknowledgement that some boundaries were meant to be tested gently. They continued walking, the detour turning into something neither of them had anticipated. Every step seemed to pull them closer, not just physically, but emotionally. The conversation shifted to quieter topics, favorite books, the small absurdities of the world, fleeting thoughts they would have otherwise kept to themselves. He realized how rarely she let anyone in, how carefully she guarded her moments of honesty, and how much he wanted to be trusted. By the time they reached the edge of the park, the detour had already done its work. They weren't just two people walking home, they were two strangers brushing against the edges of something that might become profound. The night had softened her walls, and in doing so, it had softened him too, a slow, gentle pull toward a connection that neither of them could ignore. And though the streetlights ahead marked the direction home, neither wanted to return just yet. Tonight, the detour wasn't about the park, or the walk, or even the rain-slicked streets, it was about the quiet discovery that sometimes, the paths we take with others reveal more than the ones we plan to follow. The park stretched ahead, quiet and unhurried, the night wrapping around them like a soft blanket. After a while, they came upon an empty wooden bench beside the lake, its surface still damp from an earlier drizzle. The water shimmered faintly in the silver glow of the moon, ripples moving lazily as if time itself had slowed to match the rhythm of their steps. She sank onto the bench with a gentle sigh, crossing her legs and letting her arms rest loosely in her lap. He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her space. Their shoulders brushed lightly, the slightest contact, yet enough to feel like a tether. Around them, the night was still. The rustle of leaves, the occasional bird call, even the soft lap of water against the shore seemed amplified in the quiet. It was a kind of solitude neither of them had expected to share, yet both felt oddly at home in. For a while, they spoke of trivial things, the peculiar shape of the clouds reflected in the lake, the sound of distant traffic muffled by the trees, how the night seemed to carry a different weight from the day. But gradually, her words took on a softer, more intimate tone, and he realized she was allowing herself to be heard in a way she rarely did. "You ever get tired of being the one who listens?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above the hush of the park. He looked at her, slightly startled. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But listening isn't exactly exhausting. It's seeing someone else, really seeing them, that matters." She smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her gaze dropped to the water, tracing a ripple that slid toward the shore. "I do get tired," she confessed, quiet enough for the words to feel almost like a secret. "People think I have everything figured out, the work, the home, the appearances. But sometimes I just want someone to see me, the real me. Not the version I've built for the world." He felt the subtle shift in the air, the vulnerability pressing gently between them. It wasn't dramatic or desperate, it was patient, fragile, almost like glass. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply moved a little closer, so their arms brushed again, a soft, grounding presence. The warmth of her shoulder against his made the silence speak in ways words could not. Her breath hitched softly as she glanced at him. There was something unspoken in her eyes, a hesitation paired with a longing she didn't yet dare name. And in that quiet moment, he realized that this unhurried, fragile closeness, was more meaningful than any conversation they could have had. The night seemed to hold them suspended, a delicate balance of distance and proximity. The occasional rustle of leaves, the faint ripple of water, the soft beat of their own hearts, all became part of a rhythm they were discovering together. Finally, she leaned back slightly, letting her hand rest near his on the bench. He didn't move his, letting them share the small space between, connected without effort or expectation. She gave him a fleeting smile, one that carried gratitude, trust, and something tenderly indefinable. As they sat there, the park around them fading into shadows and moonlight, he understood, this was not about grand gestures or confessions. It was about the quiet unraveling of walls, the slow recognition of trust, and the fragile, luminous space that exists when two people begin to truly see one another. Tonight, the bench wasn't just a place to rest. It was the threshold of something delicate, something neither of them fully understood yet, but both had already begun to feel. The air shifted as they rose from the bench, the first soft drops of rain beginning to fall. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a gentle sprinkle that made the leaves glisten and the pavement shine under the streetlights. But soon, the rain thickened, tracing delicate lines down her hair and the folds of her coat. She laughed, a sound he had only just begun to recognize as genuinely hers, light, unguarded, carrying a note of surprise at the suddenness of the weather. He offered her his jacket instinctively, but she shook her head with a playful smile, letting the rain soak through her hair and drip from her shoulders. There was a wildness to her in that moment, a freedom he had never seen before. She tilted her head upward, letting the raindrops kiss her face, her eyes closed against the chill, and he couldn't look away. Something inside him stirred, a mix of awe and longing that caught him by surprise. He stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, and gently brushed a raindrop from her cheek with his thumb. She opened her eyes and met his gaze, hesitation and curiosity flickering within them. The moment was fleeting, yet heavy with unspoken meaning. The rain created a kind of intimacy that no words could capture. It blurred the world around them, muting the distant hum of the city, and left only the sound of falling droplets and their own quiet breaths. His hand hovered near hers, almost touching, but he waited, respecting the fragile line of closeness she allowed. She shifted slightly, and for a brief instant, their arms brushed. The contact was light, yet enough to send a ripple through him, a silent acknowledgement that they were no longer strangers walking side by side. There was trust there, fragile but unmistakable, the kind that grows from shared silences and subtle gestures rather than declarations. They moved through the park slowly, each step deliberate, savoring the sensation of the rain, the smell of wet earth, and the soft glow of the lamps reflecting on puddles. She spoke occasionally, her voice quieter than before, thoughts drifting to memories or fleeting feelings, each one a glimpse into the self she rarely revealed. He listened, letting the moments linger, aware that this night was shaping them in ways neither could articulate yet. At one point, she paused under a large oak tree, letting the rain fall more heavily on her shoulders. She looked at him, eyes glimmering in the dim light, and whispered almost shyly, "Don't look at me like that." He smiled softly, but he couldn't stop himself. The way the rain framed her, the soft tilt of her head, the gentle curve of her lips, it was impossible not to notice. Yet she didn't pull away. Instead, she let him see her fully, the way she was beneath the composed exterior, alive and open in the rain. For a moment, the world ceased to exist beyond them. There were no expectations, no rules, only the shared awareness of proximity, warmth, and the quiet intensity of mutual discovery. Each subtle glance, every slight movement, carried weight, revealing emotions neither had voiced yet. By the time the drizzle softened to a light mist, he realized something profound had shifted. This walk, this night, and this rain had broken invisible walls, the barriers between distance and intimacy, hesitation and trust. And as they prepared to continue toward her street, he understood that whatever path they were on, it would never be just a walk again. By the time they reached her building, the rain had eased into a gentle mist, leaving the night smelling of wet earth and freshly fallen leaves. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies small sounds, the soft click of her heels on the pavement, the faint rustle of her coat, the distant hum of a street lamp. They paused under the awning of her entrance, neither wanting to be the first to step inside. She looked up at him, her eyes holding a mixture of something unspoken and tender. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice was softer than it had been earlier in the evening, carrying a weight he felt in his chest. It wasn't gratitude for the walk alone, it was gratitude for the night, for the closeness, for the rare space where she had allowed herself to be seen. He nodded, trying to find the right words, but they felt heavy, inadequate. The moment was delicate, suspended between what had passed and what might yet come. He wanted to say more, to tell her how the walk had changed him, how the light in her eyes under the rain had left a mark he couldn't shake, but the words remained trapped, fragile and incomplete. She shifted slightly, letting her hand hover near the railing, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Their shoulders touched lightly again, a fleeting contact that spoke more than any conversation could. He wanted to linger, to stay in that space where words were unnecessary, but he also felt the pull of propriety, the unspoken rules that made him hesitate. Then she leaned forward, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that caught him off guard. "You know," she said softly, almost like a secret shared between them, "sometimes a walk isn't just a walk." There was a pause after her words, heavy with meaning, as if she were daring him to respond in kind. He swallowed, feeling the warmth of the night, the rain-soaked air, and the proximity of her presence all at once. He wanted to stay, to take her hand, to ask her to step into the night with him just a little longer, but instead, he simply nodded, acknowledging the weight of what she had just revealed. For a long moment, they simply stood there, side by side, the quiet stretching around them like a fragile bubble. The mist hung in the air, softening the edges of the world, and the glow of the street lamp reflected in her eyes, making them look luminous, almost otherworldly. He noticed how the dampness made her hair curl slightly at the ends, how the collar of her coat framed her face perfectly, how every small detail seemed magnified in the stillness of the night. Finally, she straightened, taking a step toward her door. She hesitated, as if savoring the last moment, before disappearing inside. He stayed under the awning, watching her go, feeling the emptiness of the street around him. The rain had stopped, but its presence lingered, the damp air, the wet leaves, and the memory of the closeness they had shared. As he turned to leave, he realized that the walk, the detour, and the rain had done something quiet but irreversible. They had opened a door between them, a door that neither distance nor hesitation could close. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew, without a doubt, that something had begun. Tonight, the doorstep was more than a threshold to her apartment. It was the edge of something new, fragile, and profoundly real, a place where unspoken feelings lingered, waiting to be explored in the quiet of another walk, another night, and perhaps, another detour. The morning arrived with an ordinary quietness that felt almost unnatural after the intensity of the night. The café, usually bustling with familiar faces and clinking cups, seemed smaller, dimmer, as if the world had shifted while he slept. He slid into his usual seat by the window, the one where the light caught the dust motes in the air just right, and waited, though he wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Her table sat empty. Her notebook was gone, the faint trace of her pen on its pages now only a memory in his mind. The absence felt tangible, an echo of the warmth and quiet intimacy they had shared only hours before. The barista's cheerful greetings, the sound of steaming milk, even the soft background music, all seemed distant, muffled, like he was hearing them through water. He couldn't stop replaying the walk. Her laughter in the rain, the way she had let him brush a strand of hair from her face, the subtle brush of their arms on the detour through the park, each detail was etched into his mind, vivid and persistent. He realized that the night had shifted something inside him, something he hadn't known was there until now. The questions swirled: what had the detour really meant for her? Was it loneliness? A need for connection? Or had it been an invitation she hadn't dared to voice aloud? He could remember the way her eyes had looked at him by the bench, by the oak tree, in the soft drizzle, and he understood that she had shared fragments of herself in a way she almost never did. And he had noticed. He had felt them, acutely, without needing her to explain. Time passed slowly. The cafe filled and emptied again, yet her absence left a quiet hollow. He sipped his coffee, savoring the warmth, but it didn't quite reach him. His thoughts kept drifting back to her, to the rain, to the detour that had somehow become more than just a path home, a journey into understanding, into discovery, into the subtle beginnings of something neither of them had names for yet. Then, unexpectedly, she appeared. Her entrance was calm, graceful, as though nothing had shifted in the ordinary world, yet everything had. She paused for a moment when she saw him, just long enough for a flicker of surprise and something warmer to pass across her face. She crossed the room with that quiet assurance he had always admired, her steps deliberate yet unhurried, and finally sat across from him. "It's been a long week without that walk," she said, her voice carrying the faintest smile, teasing yet genuine. The words were simple, almost casual, but loaded with meaning. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement of shared memory, a bridge back to the night that had left both of them changed. He felt his heart lift at her presence, a quiet relief and a thrill mingled together. The ordinary cafe, the morning light, even the smell of coffee and pastry, all faded into the background. What remained was her eyes meeting his, her presence a gentle yet undeniable reminder that something unspoken had begun, a rhythm of closeness, a familiarity, a tentative promise that this detour through the night wasn't over. For the first time that week, he felt fully awake. Not just to the day, not just to the cafe, but to the quiet, persistent possibility of her, of them. And as she smiled again, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, he knew that the next walk, the next moment they shared, would not simply be a walk. It would be something else entirely, a continuation, a deepening, a deliberate step into what had begun that rainy night. The evening arrived with a gentle hush that felt almost like the city was holding its breath. The cafe had emptied, the chairs stacked neatly, and the soft glow of the light spilling through the windows cast long shadows on the pavement outside. He was there early, waiting, not nervously, but with a quiet anticipation that had settled in his chest since the morning. When she arrived, she moved with her usual composed grace, yet there was something different in the way she paused at the doorway, her eyes scanning the familiar interior until they found him. She smiled, the kind of smile that carried recognition, warmth, and a subtle challenge all at once. It was the smile of someone who knew that the detour they had shared before was about to become a path they would walk together willingly. He stood, offering a small, unspoken invitation, and she accepted it without hesitation. "Walk me home," he asked this time, letting his words hang lightly in the air. She tilted her head slightly, a playful glint in her eyes, and then nodded. The streets were quiet, bathed in the mellow glow of street lamps, and the night felt softer than ever, as though it had been waiting for this moment. They fell into step together naturally, as if the rhythm had been waiting for them all along. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, their hands swinging close, but not touching yet, the tension subtle, like a string pulled taut but not snapped. The city seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them moving side by side through the familiar streets, the ordinary transformed by the intimacy of shared silence. As they passed the park, she glanced up at him, her eyes catching the soft light and reflecting something tender, something that spoke of trust and quiet desire. Without a word, she let her hand brush against his, once, lightly, as though testing the connection. He caught her fingers gently, and then, without hesitation, their hands intertwined. The gesture felt inevitable, as though it had been waiting for them since the night of the first detour, the night when rain and words had begun to unravel the walls around her. The night air carried the faint scent of autumn leaves and damp earth, and he noticed the subtle curve of her smile, the relaxed tilt of her head against his shoulder when they walked through the park. She leaned closer, a quiet acknowledgement that the walk itself was no longer merely a walk, it had become a shared space of understanding, warmth, and something deeply tender that neither of them had fully named. By the time they reached the edge of her street, the city lights reflected on the wet pavement like scattered stars. She stopped for a moment, her hand still holding his, and looked up at him with an expression that was equal parts mirth and sincerity. "You know what I wanted that night?" she asked softly. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at his lips. "A detour," he guessed. She shook her head, her smile deepening, and he felt a quiet warmth settle in his chest. "A reason not to go home yet," she whispered. In that moment, words became unnecessary. The walk, the detour, the laughter, and the rain all coalesced into something unspoken yet profoundly real. He slipped his arm around her shoulders, feeling the soft weight of her leaning in, the heat of her presence against the cool night air. She rested her cheek lightly against his chest, and for the first time, everything felt exactly as it should, calm, deliberate, and entirely theirs. They didn't rush. There was no need. The night stretched around them, holding them in its quiet embrace, and he realized that sometimes, the detour isn't a deviation from the path. Sometimes, it is the path, the destination itself, crafted in moments of shared vulnerability, trust, and the slow, steady bloom of something profoundly beautiful. And in that silence, in the soft rhythm of their intertwined hands and the gentle sway of their steps, the story of that night, and every night after, found its perfect ending. If this quiet, slow burn detour captured your heart, don't miss the full journey, hit like, subscribe, and every walk has a story, and this one is just getting started.